This week on Hangar Talk, Piper and Cessna owners speak up about their spar issues.
And PSI testing revenue to FBOs and schools is slashed.
MT tests the propeller of endless blades.
Charting changes challenge pilots.
Also, the NOTAM system decides to take a nap.
Ian, are you ready to do some Hangar Talk?
Let's do it.
From AOPA, your freedom to fly. This is Hangar Talk.
1056, turn right, heading 130, contact final.
Welcome to Hangar Talk, everybody. I'm Ian Twombly.
I'm David Toulis.
David, our guest this week is somebody that Julie Walker spoke with, Bruno Brasilino. I hope I got that right. He's, of course, Brazilian, but he has I think it's an Instagram channel that he does a lot of posting on with his Tiger. And it's really cool because he flies all around kind of the New York area. And he's got this great story about even controllers recognizing him now. And I love his stuff because it's educational and fun, right?
Yeah,
so
he does. He was. I saw one of his recent posts that he was surprised that one of the ATC folks called him out and said, "Hey, are you Fly with Bruno?" And he was. And so Instagram is fly_with_Bruno. And I look forward to hearing that interview in just a few minutes.
Cool. All right. So let's get to the news. We're going to start off with the Piper Cessna spar issues. Now, there's no real news here. So if you own a Piper or Cessna, just, take a deep breath because we're not going to scare you with anything. So we just want to revisit this a little bit because it is such a big issue for owners of certain Cessnas and Pipers, some of these ADs that have come out. So much so that AOPA has sent surveys now to the owners of some of these airplanes to try and get a better understanding of how much these eddy current inspections cost, how available are they, and I think most importantly, how are they performing during the inspections?
Right. So it is interesting. I was telling listeners earlier that I had a hard cell propeller AD on my Mooney that necessitated eddy current inspection. I had to fly about 50 miles to get that eddy current inspection. It looks like the answer to the survey that we sent out, a lot of the folks, 92% of the respondents, in fact, reported that services were available within about 150 miles. That's not terrible. 77% reported eddy current inspections availability within about 50 miles. And why is this important, Ian? It's because if you have the eddy current inspection on those wing attach bolts, that area of the spar, which tends to get elongated and some play in the wings right there. If your aircraft is doomed, that you need to get that addressed, well, the FAA won't issue a ferry permit for you to reposition that airplane. Yeah. So the proximity is really important.
That is important. Yeah, and obviously the issue is so important because there have been accidents because of spars, but I think there's really a lot to learn here about how those aircraft were operated. That's really important.
Right.
The age of the aircraft in terms of airframe hours, that's also important. And it's a really technical issue, obviously. And so you found this great YouTube video that we're showing now with, I think it's aircraft components, I think they're called.
Airframe components. And this really explains what the deal is. And it's interesting, Ian, I was going to mention that during the course of watching that video, I learned that the design of that wing spar area, that attachment fitting, has changed over the years. So the new design does not lend itself to elongating the holes, where the older design had a bushing that would sometimes fall out.
Yeah. And obviously, yeah, it is interesting. And obviously there's so many implications here that go beyond just the current affected airplanes with these ADs for the whole fleet. We know that our airplanes are getting just a little bit older in average age. And so the spar is one of those areas of concern. And so I think it's important that when pilots do these inspections, mechanics and pilots take them for the inspections, especially because they want to report the good news. So the FAA is going to work off that data. They're going to work off how many cracks are found and elongated holes and how many look just fine. And so it's really important that when people get inspected that they do report that everything's good. And so that's part of what AOPA is trying to gather is what do you find on these inspections? So we can go back to the FAA and say, really, this is not a fleet-wide problem, just as an example.
Yeah, exactly. Because it depends, like you said, Ian, on how the aircraft are used, how many flight hours they've had, how much of a demanding environment they've operated in. And so folks can call the AOPA, PIC, yet another reason to be a member of AOPA, fighting for your freedom to fly. PIC is at 800-872-2672. We were asking about that. I was asking about this before the show. It's 800 USA AOPA if you want to
Hmm.
do it, on your phone with
Yeah.
the alphanumeric keypad.
Yep.
But 800-872-2672. Talk to one of the experts at PIC, and they are experts, and they do know a lot about this, and they'll pass that info on to our advocacy folks and to the FAA.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. So, speaking of advocacy, folks, we want to move on to this next issue, which we know that it might not affect you personally now, or so you think, but we gather that there will be long-term impacts down the road, and that is that PSI, the provider of testing services for airman knowledge testing, obviously you go and get the test at a flight school, but
Mhm.
PSI, administers the test through the flight school. They give money back to the flight schools, of course, to help administer those, and as of January 1st, have significantly slashed the fees that they're going to be giving to the flight schools.
Yeah, let's make the point, first of all, that as a consumer, as someone who's gonna get tested, whether it's for your private or your instrument, commercial, etcetera, the testing fee has not changed. It's about $175.
Yeah, that's important.
That's what it is locally. And so that hasn't changed, but the revenue to the FBOs, flight schools, et cetera, has been cut by 2/3.
Hmm.
And yet again, a lot of folks have called into our PIC office asking, did we know about this? What are we doing about that? What's AOPA doing about it? And we have been engaged for a while on this
Yeah.
topic, Ian.
Yeah, that's right. So we actually had sent a letter to PSI, had a lot of follow up conversations, and they responded. We addressed these concerns about test access and costs for the end user. PSI said, thanks for the feedback, but no thanks. So they've, at least for the meantime, have decided they're going to keep the structure the way it is. They know they're going to lose testing centers because of it. They've admitted as much. They think they have the opportunity to bring others on board, and they've given some data to the FAA to support that. Whether that
Mhm.
ultimately happens or not, I don't know. For you and I when we're in the East Coast, there's lots of flight schools. It's easy to drive from one to the other. It's probably not a huge deal. But if you live out west, the Mountain West, or in
Yeah,
Alaska or something like that, or
absolutely a problem.
rural Texas or something, it's like you could have to go hundreds of miles to take a test.
Yeah, I've actually been doing a little flight planning, how to get my tri-pacer back from Oregon to the East Coast and, going through the Intermountain region, that there are many places with no airports,
Hmm.
or there might be a few airports, but then there's no guarantee that there's gonna be a bona fide testing center there or
Yeah.
nearby. And
Yeah.
the thing is, the FBOs and the flight schools, they really do have to keep an eye on the, I guess, on the technology, a little bit on
Yeah.
the software, make sure that's where, make sure that you as a potential test taker are not going to cheat. I
Hmm.
remember I had to, even back before cell phones, I mean, I had to make sure the only calculator I had was an aviation
For
specific
function,
calculator.
or
Right,
yeah,
right.
or a flight computer. Yeah, empty
Yeah,
your pockets, the whole deal.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, it costs the flight schools a lot of time. I mean, they have to maintain the space, and they have
Uh-huh,
to pay the proctor and everything else. So yeah,
exactly.
it's definitely a concern. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the future. Dave, I want to talk about something cool now, and that is
Very cool.
what I'm
Yes,
calling
I agree.
the prop of endless blades. And this is something that MT has tested. MT being the manufacturer over in Europe, and of course, a lot of people love their composite props. They're at the forefront of a lot of prop technology. They have tested an 11 blade propeller, if you can believe it.
It might as well be a solid disc at
I
that
know.
point, Ian. I mean, it's like, this thing looks incredible. If folks
Yeah.
haven't got a chance to look at it, take a peek at AOPA.org. Look for Nikki Britton's story
Hmm.
about the German-based, propeller company, MT Propeller. So they tried it out on a Piper PA-31
Hmm.
powered by Pratt& and Whitney turbine engines.
Hmm.
So, it's pretty interesting. I think what we'll see out of this is that it might change the noise signature coming from that engine, for coming
Yeah.
from those propellers, and that might be interesting technology for us to think about how does that trickle down.
I mean, flip a coin on whether this thing will actually ever make it to production, but it is cool that they're pushing the envelope there. And I agree. At a certain point, there's probably a trade off between thrust and drag. When you get so many blades, it becomes a disc, right? As you
Well,
were
yeah, yeah.
saying.
But
So,
if you can get 15% better efficiency as compared to another type of propeller,
yeah,
everyone wants to save some money, get a little bit more horsepower, that kind of
that's
thing.
significant.
It
Yep.
could work, especially
Yeah.
on some of the higher end. There's some turbine powered higher end singles that are out there that might benefit from that same technology.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in the GA world, so that's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, so 2 stories now that we're gonna finish, and both of them are big time fails, I think, by the FAA. This is me personally speaking.
Yeah.
So the first is sectionals, and this is something that people have definitely been calling in, to the PIC about.
Mhm.
If you fly near border regions, especially with Canada or Mexico, you no doubt know that the information you get on a sectional for Canada or Mexico or the Caribbean, at least parts of the Caribbean, is as reliable as it is for the US. And so
Mhm.
that's not going to be the case anymore because the FAA has decided to pull back on that data and essentially gray out half of what they used to show.
Yeah, the foreign detail is gonna be missing from future charts, and the reason the FAA gave for that is that the info hadn't been updated all that regularly anyway.
Mhm.
We have a 56-day charting cycle here,
Yeah.
and some of those were missing in the cycle. And so instead of, I guess, being liable for having wrong info or outdated info, they just said, "Oh, heck, we'll just take it all
Take
away."
it off. Yeah.
Which I'm not sure is a great idea. If you live in the Great Lakes area in Ohio, you live up in Michigan, even upstate New York, maybe near Erie,
Mhm.
Pennsylvania, you're near Canada. And
Yeah.
so you want that information. And a lot of times, in fact, I talked to Dave Hirschman, and coming back from certain parts of the Great Lakes, you could fly on the
You fly
Canadian
over
side
Canada.
a little bit.
Exactly.
Right,
That's
right.
exactly right.
And
Yeah.
and you wanna know that information. Now you can get it elsewhere. You can get it from a couple other charting sources. You can pay more money on ForeFlight and get it,
Yeah.
than the Canadian subscription, but we are used to seeing that on our normal charts and
Yeah.
and on our PDAs.
Yeah.
So that's a big miss. I agree with the folks that, who have called our PIC and have actually complained on some of the, pilot forums that I pay
Mhm.
attention to,
Mhm.
like pilotsofamerica.com
Yeah.
and some of the others.
Yeah.
So, I'm surprised that we would see that. Although, Ian, it has not been done in a vacuum. This actually there was a notice that was posted last year that said this might happen, and it
Mhm.
just was implemented.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's right. And I've seen some people theorizing that maybe it was a cost-cutting measure or something like that. But I mean, really, that's you're not talking about a massive cost here when it's about collecting foreign data. And I think the data that comes from Canada, especially, is very reliable. Probably a little less so with Mexico and the Caribbean. But I know that FAA had gotten it regularly, and they have systems in place that made sure that it was reliable. So you nailed it. I mean, the issue is when the sectionals went to the 56-day update,
Yeah.
they just weren't getting it often enough, and rather than publish something that's slightly outdated, they elected to take it off. So yeah, this is a big loss. And so yeah, you can go to Sporties and buy charts for Canada and other places, but
Uh-huh.
um, that sectional, to have that confidence in the sectional and just be able to
Yeah,
use that one thing, especially like you said, when you're just crossing a lake or something like that, that was huge, and that's
it
I think going to
was.
be a big loss.
Well, and also, like you said, on our southern border with Mexico, listen, Ian, if you're flying around in Texas and that area, the Big Bend area, and you have a flight emergency, it would be nice to know that there are airports nearby within the gliding range for you to get to.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a problem. And that actually might lead us to the other part of this discussion
Yes.
that we're going to have right now, which is the fact that some of the private airports that were previously charted on the VFR charts are not gonna be charted any longer, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of people upset about that, Ian.
Yeah, and so remind me about the spec. Is this anything under 1,500 feet? Is that
So,
right?
basically, yeah, and so the way that this was, sort of announced, that the Visual Flight Rules aeronautical charts will no longer make reference to emergency value in private airport charting unless they have a landmark value. In other words, unless you could see them pretty well or they're located near
God, how
something
subjective is
that
that? That's crazy.
It would seem to me that it would be more labor intensive to decide which has
Yeah,
landmark
exactly.
value and which
I
doesn't
mean, what are they gonna
than
do?
to
Fly over and test all these? I mean, that's crazy. Why not just
yeah.
leave it?
Well, listen, when you're a student pilot and you're going out of the fold for the first or second time,
Mhm.
you wanna know where your emergency airfields are,
Yeah.
and I would much rather know where one is even now, as a pilot with about 1,000 hours or so, that
Mhm.
I still wanna know where the emergency airfields are, and
Yes.
it just makes me feel more warm and fuzzy to know
Yeah.
that there's something there. Plus, if you
Yeah.
have an emergency and you ask a controller, it is possible you can get vectored to,
To one of those fields. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's, no offense to the lawyers who are listening, but that is like lawyers run amok, right? When they're worried about, "Oh, is it gonna be the exact right specs for an emergency
mhm.
strip?" And it's like, "Man, we'll take anything. We'll take something that's
Oh,
cleared
yeah,
out of the crops as long as it's maybe still there, right? That's better than
yeah.
nothing." So,
So again,
yeah.
our PIC folks have been fielding questions about this for a while. We had an article on it back last year on AOPA.org that said this would probably happen,
Mhm.
but we didn't give a lot of ink to it. And so when it was implemented, all of a sudden folks are going, "Hey, whoa, what's happening?" So yet another reason to belong to AOPA, so you can bounce your questions off the PIC, and also to read our stuff at AOPA.org and get that e-pilot newsletter and the flight training newsletter, as
Yeah.
well as our monthly publications. But
Yeah.
that will keep you posted on changes to come.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we want to finish off the news with something that everybody's been talking about, and that is the blue screen of death that happened to the NOTAM system as we record this. It happened yesterday, 2 days ago, I think. Just an unbelievable sequence of events, David, that happened here. The NOTAM system we know we all rely on. It's part of the regulatory requirements before we take off. And
Yeah.
so we all woke up Wednesday morning and it was like, oh, yeah, by the way, nobody's flying because the NOTAM system is down. And you just think, how is it even possible that something like this could happen?
Yeah, the FAA issued a ground stop countrywide about, in the morning, East Coast time, because they figured that would be the best time to reboot the computer. They
Yeah.
knew it would take about 90 minutes to get that going.
Yeah.
And they were
I just hang
so
on.
wrong
Can
about
you
that.
I mean, you can imagine the conversation. This is like, you call your IT department and it's like, "Oh man, I got this problem with my computer. It's running slow." They're like, "Oh, just do a restart." And so
Yeah.
it's like somebody in the IT department at FAA was like, "Oh, just do a restart on the NOTAM
Unplug it and
system.
plug it back
It'll
in.
be fine, right?" Yeah.
Yeah, I complained with my laptop, it takes about 30 or 45 seconds to reboot, but 90 minutes, I mean, that's
Yeah.
a pretty long time. And
Yeah.
listen, Ian, it's not just all about commercial airlines. Let's make that perfectly clear. About 2,000 GA flights were also affected too, and 6,600 commercial airline flights. But
Hmm.
you're talking about a ground stop on the East Coast where people are listen, on the East Coast, that 6:30 AM flight, if you're going commercial, is a
Mhm.
common flight.
Yeah.
Even as a private pilot or an IFR pilot, you are trying to get out early in the morning, generally, when the weather is, a little more
Mhm.
favorable a lot of the
Sure.
times.
Sure.
And so this was a really big snafu. I did some further digging on that, but I wanted to say that right off the bat, I do check the NOTAMs because I almost got in trouble by not checking
Aw,
them
you're
one
a good
time.
boy. Nice.
Well,
That's good.
I would. I won't say it's Dave Hirschman and I, my instructor, but one of my instructors and I were doing a flight around here, and I forgot to check NOTAMs at an airport we were intending to go to, and when I got over there, noticed that there were like it was like construction equipment on the runway,
Yeah.
and so I announced my intentions, and we had a bulky radio at the time too,
Mm.
so it got to be
A little more
a little bit.
stressful than it needs to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, I normally do check the NOTAMs, and why? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a lot more drone ops
Mhm.
now than we used to have.
That's a good point.
I'm pretty sensitive to the VIP TFRs, the temporary
Yeah.
flight restrictions for VIPs,
Yeah.
and over stadiums because
Yeah.
I've done some aerial photography over stadiums, and you gotta respect the distance laterally and vertically for that. And listen, Ian, during times of national disasters, fires out west, hurricanes
Mhm.
and tornadoes, the airspace is closed And we get back to that one snafu that we need to look at in 91.103 in the FARs, that every pilot, before they fly, needs to become familiar with all available information
Yeah.
concerning that flight.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
that's a
important.
gotcha.
Yeah, so CNN did some reporting on this and found that I think it was they were doing the restart or the update or whatever it was to not only the primary system but also the backup
Back,
system.
right,
It was a
right.
corrupt file or something, and so they kind of both happened at the same time. And I will tell you,
What does that mean, a corrupt file? Like,
I
what
you know,
happened to
I
that
don't
to
know. It's crazy.
does it
Yeah.
mean that someone was gonna have an air show, they uploaded, I don't know, a Word document that had a virus? I don't
I don't think so. They said there. I didn't hear anything about a virus. It was like, maybe it's just something that who knows. I'm not an IT guy.
corrupt file.
Um, I will say it made international news, and for good reason, because the
Mhm.
FAA is often the U.S. I will say is seen as the
The
preeminent
leader, absolutely, the leader.
aerospace country in the world, and so
Mhm.
when the whole country goes down because of a computer flop, it's like that makes international news because it has major implications not only to all the flights that are trying to head out internationally, but also just about the reputation of the system. And is it really the safest? And is it really the most efficient and everything else? And so these old systems, the NOTAM system, which we constantly harp on, I mean, here's a perfect example of how it needs to be updated. One of the many
Well,
ways.
yes, well, I agree with you, but I wanna disagree with you on one point. Listen, because they pulled a ground stop, that kept it as being the safest
Well, that's
airspace
true.
system in the
Yeah.
world too,
Yeah.
because of that. And, but I agree with you that, we need to lead the way. And I wanna say one other thing. A friend of mine works for the FAA and let me know that the ATIS system is also on very ancient legs
Mm.
too. So before that goes down, maybe
Yeah.
Congress will take a look at the funding for the
Mm.
infrastructure on the NOTAMs and on the ATIS. Listen, on the ATIS and the NOTAM systems, Ian, I mean, I live in the DC area, and the first few pages are all
Oh,
about
it's just
the
noise and yeah.
it's all about
Yeah.
the CIFRA and the freeze here in the DC area, which we've
Yeah.
had now since for like 20
Yeah,
years,
nothing
you
new.
know?
Yeah, all the new stuff. I mean, we talked about this with the Hurricane Ian, and that the closed airport NOTAMs were like number 65 in the list or something like that. It's like, man,
Yeah.
that should be flashing red at the top. It's like
It
it's
should be.
it's
It should
crazy.
be. So,
Crazy.
yeah, there's some issues that need to be addressed as we move forward. I think maybe this'll give the wake-up call to when we're talking about
Yeah.
funding, which is coming up pretty soon. We'll
Yeah,
probably
that's
talk
true.
about this more
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
near
so.
future. All
Yeah.
right.
All right. So, hey, speaking of the East Coast, somebody who's doing a lot of flying around there is Bruno. Really excited to talk to him. I think we both really respect the kind of stuff that he's putting out, and really excited to hear what he has to say about it.
Hi, my name is Bruno Brasileiro, which means Brazilian in Portuguese, and I promise that's my real last name. I am a private pilot, instrument rated. I got my license in 2019 in New York, where I live. I then moved to New Jersey, and I got my plane. It's based in Linden, New Jersey, Lima Delta Juliet, and I've been sharing my journey in aviation for the past 3 years in social media, and just sharing my experience with the rest of the world.
And so when did you start flying? How old were you? What possessed you to start this?
I fell in love with aviation when I was a 5-year-old. I loved aviation ever since. But back in Brazil, where I'm from, it wasn't that easy to pursue a career or just a hobby of aviation. So I chose a different career path. Even so, throughout my teenage years and as I grew up, I kept educating myself in aviation. I always liked watching films, movies, reading about it, and whatnot. After I moved to the U.S., thanks to a career opportunity back in 2015, I met a pilot who's now a friend of mine, a very good friend, who motivated me to go pursue my dream 30 years later. So I was 35 when I joined the flight school in New York City, in Long Island, New York, Farmingdale. In 5 months later, I got my private license. I started renting planes and flying different places, experiencing different runways, airports, weather, all kinds of stuff. And then 6 months later, I decided to get my instrument rating. I got my instrument rating through COVID. I had to dodge all of the limitations of COVID and flight schools being closed and everything. But in June 2020, I got my ticket, and that's when I decided or realized I was committed to aviation for life. So instead of renting planes, I decided to get my own plane, which I'm standing right next to now.
So what you do with aviation is you do a blog or a podcast, or what are you doing and what is your message when you do that?
Ever since I started flying, because it was such a big dream for me and such a fulfillment, I started sharing my journey through Instagram and YouTube. And my purpose in doing that is to show everyone else that perhaps love aviation but hasn't taken the first step because they either think it's too late or they are too busy for it or they don't have the money for it or anything like that, that it's possible. I'm just an average guy who works 9 to 5 but still decided to pursue his dream, was able to get through his licenses, got my private and my instrument and even my plane. And whenever I'm not working and I'm not home, I'm flying. And because I want to be proficient, I want to be current, but most importantly, flying is like a therapy to me these days. And whenever I'm up there, all of my problems and everything else stays on the ground, literally, and it's the best part of my day.
So Fly with Bruno is your handle.
Fly _ Bruno.
And what does, if someone's going to watch or someone's going to come to your channel, what would they see? Are you taking them on travels? Are you taking them on lessons, or what's your message?
My message is, or my main goal is to show how fun aviation can be, whether you have it as a hobby or as a career. In my case, as a hobby. I take them on every place I travel, all of the amazing things that you can only do on a plane. For instance, flying over the Niagara Falls or taking a weekend trip to somewhere that would be too far to drive, such as Maine, New Hampshire, Maryland, taking a weekend trip to Florida and back, and obviously flying to Sun and Fun, Oshkosh, and other fly-ins, especially the Grumman fly-ins, which are adventures or places or experiences you wouldn't get to have without actually flying a plane to these places.
Have you heard from any of your followers that you've inspired them?
I get messages on almost every day saying for people that are just thanking me because they say your content helped me pursue my dream of becoming a pilot, or I thought I was too old, but after I watched you, I decided to pursue, or I've been a pilot for 20 years, but I haven't flown in a while, and you inspired me to actually get back to it. So I get a lot of messages of people that basically say that I just helped show them that aviation is worth it, and all the effort that you put into it is worth it, and there's something very fun on the other side. I'm super thankful for that, and that's what keeps me going. And I post every day because I know that somewhere in the world somebody's watching this and thinking, if he can do it, so can I.
And tell me a little bit about your aircraft.
This is a Grumman Cheetah, Grumman AA-5A Cheetah. It's a 1977 model with, I think, 2,500 hours on the airframe and another 800 hours on the engine. I got this plane back in July 2020. Ever since, I've upgraded the panel because I wanted it to be a solid IFR platform. I take very good care of the plane, did a lot of other necessary upgrades to fix squawks that had been here for a while. I want this to be a safe plane, but most importantly, it's a plane that has taken me anywhere that I wanted to go without ever leaving me stranded or giving me any headaches. It flies great. It treats me well. I treat it well, and I always fly with my little buddy Mars, who the internet helped me name, and so it's Bruno and Mars flying everywhere.
Okay, I was going to ask you if your airplane has a nickname, but I guess the airplane doesn't need one because we've got Bruno and Mars.
And Mars is a cheetah, which is the name of the plane. Grummans used to, when they existed, Grummans always named their planes after felines. Cheetah is one of them, as tigers, as wildcats, tomcats, and all of that. So a lot of people ask me, why didn't you go or pick Cherokee or a 172 that are sort of like the go-to options, especially because everybody trains on them. That was my go-to. But as soon as I started shopping for a plane, I realized how hard was to find one that it was in good shape, that was that had its maintenance up to date. And sometimes you would find one that was all the way across the country. And by the time you called the owner to ask about the plane, somebody else would have already bought it or secured it. So I started to just put a list of all of the planes that would fit in that same category that could be an option. And I got actually a message from someone who knew that this plane would be for sale soon. The seller or the owner then hadn't advertised it yet. So I gave him a call, and I found out that the plane was actually 60 miles from my apartment, which made it so much easier because I was looking at planes that were in Florida, California, Arizona, Oregon, you name it. So when I found a plane that was near me, and I wasn't looking for a Grumman specifically, but the minute I saw the plane, I was like, this is a big opportunity. And the other funny thing is, as I drove to the airport, with having all of these thoughts, like, what am I doing? I'm buying a plane. Is this the stupidest thing I've ever did? Or like, am I doing this consciously? Is ownership really for me? And I remember pulling up next to the plane, which was tied down on the ramp, and I looked at the tail number, which back then I didn't know, and it said 84U. And I look at the 4U, and it says, you know what? I thought maybe it's talking to me. It's for me, so I'm going to do it. I remember I took the plane flying that day. As soon as I landed, I looked to the seller who was seated on the right seat, and I said, I want it. I don't care. And it was the best decision I've ever done in my life. So I thank everybody that follows me for their support. The reason when you share something that you love, it's one of the most fulfilling things is to know that other people are as passionate about it as you are. And I'm not only thrilled and flattered to see that a lot of people enjoy my content just because they like aviation, but most importantly, that a lot of people feel inspired to either start pursuing their aviation dreams, start pursuing their career in aviation, wherever they are, and just doing what I do, just flying my own plane around the United States, the Northeast. It's just humbling to me that it helps feel like a lot of other people's dreams for aviation. And this is the sole purpose of everything I do, is to inspire more people to get into aviation, because it's the most amazing thing I've ever done.
So thanks to Julie for getting that interview. And David, I have a lot of respect for people who put out really, I guess, thoughtful and interesting commentary and content, and where they talk about some of their own struggles or challenges, things they could do better. And he's really good at that, sort of analyzing his own flights and sharing that with the world and showing all the sides to being a pilot.
And sharing some of that joy and taking us along for the ride.
Yeah.
I think that's, we live in vicariously flying with Bruno.
Yeah.
So I appreciate Julie grabbing Bruno and Josh Cochran for getting the video together and the audio for us to share with our folks. And maybe one of these days you and I could do something like that, and we'll get that going too.
All right, cool. Hey, that's all the time we have. I'm Ian Twombly. Our editor is Austin Hansen.
I'm David Toulis, and don't forget you can find us at aopa.org/Hangar Talk, and now on the YouTube channel. So find us either place, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, we'll see you.